Yo, what's going on guys? Arekkz here, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today we are going to be speaking about, in my opinion, one of the most exciting things in Destiny 2, and that is exploration. The new destinations and some of the stuff we can do whilst we are there. This is of course something that I think a lot of us have wanted to see in much greater detail, and of course in the beta we didn't get a chance to kind of properly explore. Sure, you can kind of venture around on the strike, but it's not really the same thing because certain stuff doesn't activate, things are locked off, you know the deal. Point is, exploration and just general open world stuff is something that I, and I'm sure a lot of you guys, have really wanted to see. I mean, after all, this is one of the things that is drastically different this time around. Destiny 1, it had open worlds for us to explore, but there wasn't a great deal of exciting stuff to do there, whereas in Destiny 2, they've promised a ton of different and very exciting stuff. So this is something I think a lot of us really want to dive deeper into. And of course today, IGN, as part of their IGN First coverage, they decided to explore Nessus in greater detail, and in this video they gave us a look at the new revised public events, adventures, lost sectors, a new thing called world quests, as well as flashpoints, the associated rewards for flashpoints, which is prestigious gear, and a few other things like that. So in this video we're going to go over absolutely all of that, talk to you guys about everything you need to know. So if you do enjoy this, then a like would be super appreciated. Comment down below if you have any questions. And of course, if you want to see the IGN video for yourself, I've also linked that down below. Now to begin with, let's start by talking about public events. If you guys didn't play Destiny 1, then public events are effectively timed events that occur in the world. Something will trigger an activity. It might be, say, drop pods come in and you have to defend them from enemies or different things like that. And in Destiny 1, they weren't exactly the most exciting or difficult activity. You could, generally speaking, solo them and they were largely forgettable. However, in Destiny 2, they are working to, at least from what they said, heavily revamp public events. They are still fundamentally the same in terms of kind of structure as they were before, in that there will be a timer on the map, and of course now, thanks to the new map, we can actually track exactly when they're going to be kicking off. You can see a timer for them, and when you get there, an activity will trigger. In the case of the gameplay, the one they were doing was the Cabal excavation. So in this one, a big drill was kind of present and you had to defend this from a big Cabal warship that was basically trying to bomb you on the head. So you would then have to fight incoming waves of enemies, protect them for a number of waves, and upon completing it, you then complete the public event and you get some rewards. However, while it does sound rather familiar, what they've done this time around is that they've effectively tried to take some of the sort of essence of activities like Court of Arekkz and tried to sort of infuse that and weave that into public events, because they've effectively said that what they want to try and do is take some of the sort of difficulty and challenge factor that you found in something like the Court of Arekkz, and instead of kind of just having that in one fixed location week in, week out, they've instead tried to spread that throughout public events. So essentially what that means is that we should hopefully have events that are slightly more interesting, slightly more difficult, and with kind of a certain degree of challenge there, which should then of course make them feel a lot more exciting, and of course we might be more inclined to get involved in them, time and time again. It's also worth noting that public events now have what is known as a heroic trigger. This is an optional objective that you can trigger to get a harder version of the event. The harder version of the event is of course more difficult with more enemies, but it also means more rewards. Moving on from there to speak about adventures. Now, we've spoken about these in the past. They are effectively, or kind of up until now, they've been described as sort of 10 to 15 minute long missions or side quests, and they'll sort of introduce you to different sort of gameplay elements, and they'll kind of have you, do different things per mission. Sometimes they'll introduce you to characters or things like that, but of course in today's IGN First, they spoke a little bit more about them. They are similar in scope to some of the missions you would have done in, say, Destiny 1. They will, again, tell you stories about either particular characters or about the destination, and more importantly, they are self-contained, they're reasonably quick, and there are no loading screens. As you can of course see on the gameplay, you can basically trigger them whilst you are in the open world, so you won't need to interrupt your flow. So if you're out there with, say, a fire team exploring the world, doing, public events, patrols, looking for lost sectors, and suddenly you stumble across an adventure, you can all just start the adventure together, do that, and then of course go back to exploring the world once you finish. After that, they then went on to speak about lost sectors. Now, these are said to have originated from the idea of, say, finding a small cave in an open world and then wondering, what if there was something really cool down there? So they decided to try and expand on that idea and make it so that there is effectively something really cool down that kind of tiny hidden cave. The flow for a lost sector is quite simple. You will spot a symbol, which is typically painted in a location that is visible from a main road. Now, they are, of course, still well hidden, and some of you guys might have seen them during the beta, but generally speaking, you should be able to see the sign for the most part from some sort of main pathway. Once you've found that, you then need to get closer and discover the actual entrance. This will have you hunting around, and they won't be in the easiest place to find. Some of them are easier to find than others, and some of them will actually have some gameplay tied to finding them. They didn't actually specify what that gameplay is, but I imagine that might be, you know, something like you have to actively do something to, say, trigger a doorway to open, or maybe you have to, like, I don't know, stand and build a conflux. The point is, some of them will actually be, you know, slightly more intricate, and some of the kind of entrances won't necessarily be quite so easy to find. But once you do find the entrance, you'll then work your way through the lost sector, and once you're at the end, you'll have an encounter. You'll have to defeat a boss, and once you defeat the boss, you unlock a chest, and you get some rewards. Unfortunately, we don't know what you get because the screenshot here of opening the chest was heavily zoomed in to, of course, hide any of the items you got. I imagine they're going to be pretty cool. It could well even be an exotic because, of course, they did say these are going to be pretty cool things. And it would kind of make sense if you have, say, a fixed number of lost sectors. If there's, say, you know, like 5 per planet, then there's 4 planets, maybe kind of like 20 different lost sectors. Maybe there are pieces of gear, exclusive kind of exotic weapons tied to each of those, and of course then that'll be an incentive to go hunting them all out because then that'll tie to some pretty sweet loot. But of course at the moment, until we actually see this for ourselves, we again don't know for sure. So moving on from there to speak about a new thing called World Quests. Some of you guys may have seen this blue little icon before on the map. Up until now, we thought it may well have just been kind of a new quest icon, and while it is technically speaking a quest, it is not a conventional story mission. This is a new thing they're introducing called World Quests. Now, one such example for this was a quest from Failsafe on Nessus. She is the AI that's still active on a crashed ship on the planet. And the way they described World Quests is that if adventures are represented kind of as small bite-sized stories, World Quests are much larger, more interesting, multi-part stories about a destination. These ones are actually unlocked after you complete the main campaign, and the idea behind that is they give you a reason to kind of then go back and revisit destinations. So let's just say you play through the story, you visit the destinations, you complete the campaign, you've kind of like got a basic understanding of, you know, what's been going on and everything, and then if you want to delve a little bit deeper, you then dive back in and do the world quest to discover even more about that. So for those of you guys that are kind of like really into, you know, story and lore and whatnot, then you're probably going to want to go back and visit all the destinations, complete all the adventures and the world quests to try and get a kind of complete understanding of everything that's going on. And of course, if you don't care about story, but you care about loot, well, they also said that world quests are also going to have some pretty good rewards. So there's that too. After that, they actually spoke very briefly about the landing points. Of course, there are multiple different landing zones around the map that you can actually use to travel to different points. However, when you first visit a destination, they will not all be unlocked. In fact, the very first time you visit a destination, not a lot will be unlocked at all. Your map will actually be pretty empty because they want there to be this feeling of discovery. So you'll begin kind of like working your way out, discovering locations, uncovering adventures, public events, different landing zones. Sometimes you'll actually get to areas where there are kind of like higher level enemies and you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't be here right now. So you then kind of go back and come back later. They really want to sort of make sure there's actually a feeling of progression whilst you are kind of unlocking and exploring these planets. So in all the footage where you kind of see loads of icons everywhere, that is not the map you will see at the very beginning of the game. Then finally, let's talk about Flashpoints. Now, Flashpoints are another new thing. They spoke about them in passing in one of their earlier IGN First articles. At the time, they only really sort of like teased what they were, so there wasn't a complete explanation as to what it would kind of entail, whereas today's video actually dove a little bit deeper. So to begin with, when they were kind of going into Destiny 2, they said they wanted to create a big weekly activity with an awesome reward that everyone can get involved in, that was focused on the open world. So it's kind of like a counterpoint to the Nightfall, which will actually send you into a specific strike with, say, a team of 3 Guardians. This one instead is just something that is in the open world. Everyone can get involved, whether you're in a team or you're solo. And of course, you can also get some sweet loot in the process. The example in this footage is, of course, on Nessus. And quite simply, the Flashpoint requires that you complete public events. And once you've done that, you get prestigious gear. Now that in itself might not sound that exciting. I mean, the way they kind of describe it as like, you know, this new activity called Flashpoints, when in actual fact it's just another reason to do public events. I mean, why exactly is that new? Well, when you dive a little bit deeper, there is actually more to do in Flashpoints. To begin with, again, you get an awesome reward, and we don't know yet what prestigious gear is. We can only kind of like assume it's got a different engram color, it's white, so hopefully it's some kind of like really cool looking gear, and therefore you kind of want to do it on a weekly basis so you can kind of build up a really cool set. But until we actually get to see that, we honestly have no idea. So if you guys have any ideas as to what you think prestigious gear could be, let me know in the comments down below. However, on top of that, on a weekly basis, Cade 6 will also sell you a bunch of treasure maps that will correspond with the featured destination. So if the kind of flashpoint that week is on Nessus, then your treasure maps will also be for Nessus. So hopefully treasure maps will then lead to, again, cool gear, weapons, maybe exotics. There will also be a bunch of secret bosses that you can only trigger when flashpoints are active, and they are typically tied to the public events. So it might well be that if you complete a public event really quickly, then an additional boss will spawn at the end, or if you kind of trigger the heroic modifier and you complete a certain condition, then again, more bosses will show up. So there will be select bosses, and they will of course have their own associated loot. So that itself is also something else that will kind of come out only when a flashpoint is active. They said there is also going to be more cool stuff, again, associated with this activity, but they haven't kind of like delved into that just yet. So there is, of course, some stuff they're still keeping pretty close to their chest. But essentially, in summary, a flashpoint will run for 1 week, and during that week, one of the 4 destinations, so there's either Nessus, the European Dead Zone, Io, or Titan, one of those 4 destinations will be nominated, and your kind of core underlying objective is to go and take part in public events. So of course there are lots of new public events, so hopefully it shouldn't necessarily feel as sort of grindy as it would be as, say, doing public events in Destiny 1. But on top of those public events, you'll also have treasure maps that will hopefully lead you to cool stuff. You'll also have additional hidden bosses, which will then have their own associated loot, and of course some other stuff on top. So it's effectively a means to kind of draw people to a destination on a weekly basis, create some activity on that planet, and hopefully give you guys a chance to sort of jump in with other people. Of course, you might not necessarily be teamed up, but you might be roaming around and then sort of stumble across other people also doing public events, so it could end up being quite a social activity. But aside from that, that is pretty much it. That is a brief look at some of the stuff we're getting up to whilst in these destinations. There are, again, as mentioned, some other things they have yet to speak about, some things they've kind of like been particularly vague on, and of course on the loot front, we don't know exactly what we'll be getting just yet, but that in itself, the fact that there's going to be destinations for us to explore, actual things to kind of like go looking for, uncover, discover, all that kind of stuff, should definitely keep us busy. Now the question, of course, beyond that point is quite how long it'll keep us busy for. I mean, once you've kind of completed the campaign missions, you've done most of the kind of world quests, the adventures, and then all that remains is, say, a weekly flashpoint. I mean, once you've done the complete rotation, you've been through, say, Titan, Io, European Dead Zone, and Nessus, will it be fresh the second time around? But for that, honestly, we won't know until we try ourselves. But at least for the time being, I am definitely super excited to dive in and start exploring every single corner of these planets. I can't wait to discover the lost sectors, find some cool gear, so that is definitely something to look forward to. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Again, if you guys have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. Take it easy, catch you next time, peace out.